Voices with your host, Terrence Lachey. This radio roundtable features community, business, and religious leaders that discuss current events and topics that impact our urban community. If you would like to be a guest or if you have a suggested topic, contact the station today at 616-259-7342. Now, into the program.
Greetings and welcome back to another episode of Community Voices. I'm Terrence Lachey and you're tuned in to 91.9 FM, The People's Choice. We're excited that we have these opportunities to talk about what's happening in and around the greater Grand Rapids and, for that matter, the West Michigan area. We bring you the best. Today's guest is one of the best. She's actually an author, but she's a chief strategist with her own consulting firm, and that is Upton Consulting Group. And that's none other than Dr. Sandra Upton. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
I'm glad you made it. I'm elated about the fact that this book that we're going to be talking about today is just kind of the tip of the iceberg. You have quite a bit of depth in the field of study that we're going to be discussing, but I just want you to be yourself. And we were teasing a little off air about the one-word phrases and finish the statements. We might try a little bit of that.
Okay.
All right, because I want to make it entertaining or at least exciting for everyone who's listening. If you are stable somewhere, of course, if you're listening and you're driving, you don't want to try to, invite anybody. But if you're sitting and you're watching this, why don't you share this or invite someone to tune in, because you will not be disappointed with the discussion today. We're going to be talking about all things DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So you are the author of a brand new book, but you've been doing this work for quite a while. How long have you been?
Yes, I have been doing it a little bit. To sound old, I can say I've been doing it for at least a quarter of a century.
Back in the day.
Back in the day.
Yes.
But over 25 years.
Sure.
In a wide range of settings. Worked in academia for many years, and DEI was a passion in that space from day one, and that has expanded significantly in terms of the reach. So 25 years in a wide range of contexts across the country.
And you were very young when you started.
I was very young. I was a baby.
You're preteen. But think about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, for those who may be wondering what those letters stand for. It has evolved. I think early days it was, civil rights, equal rights, EEO, and then DEI. Talk a little bit about the evolution, because this is your life's work. Yeah. And the book that you just recently published is good. I'm halfway through, and it is really good. But talk about the evolution of what DEI has come to be.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think you described it perfectly. It is very much a product of the civil rights movement, and we have evolved from that. But it's interesting also because I think DEI as a practice is still relatively new, right? And so, I think we're still learning a lot. There's limited research. There's some for different pockets of the work, but the overall practice is still relatively new, and I think we're still figuring a lot of things out, trying to get better positioned to respond to the backlash that we are experiencing today. But it's new, but it's evolving, and I think that we are continuing to move in a good direction. More and more people are getting into the space and understanding the need for the work, and even in the midst of the backlash, understanding the need for the work and why it's so important, and the fact that we have to keep pushing the work forward, both in practice as well as the research around it.
We're going to talk about that backlash in just a moment. I want to do a quick station identification for somebody who might just be tuning in or maybe riding through and listening on the radio. You're listening to Community Voices. I've got Dr. Sandra Upton of the Upton Consulting Group here, and I believe that our subject matter and our topic is relevant to all of us. It's not a black-white thing. It is all sorts of diversity, equity, and inclusion. You mentioned a little bit about backlash, and I call it solar flares. That was the term that I've been using when making presentations. I do some similar consulting work and have had the opportunity to work with you on the cultural intelligence.
Yes.
When people don't have a balanced, intelligence quotient in the area of cultural diversity, we have these backlashes, we have these flares. The eclipse is probably a good example how the moon covered the sun. But if you looked closely, you could see these flares of light coming from behind what would have been darkness. Now, I just kind of set up a poetic image of that. What are we experiencing with backlash or the solar flares of diversity, equity, and inclusion right now?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's the question of the day, right? You know, on one hand, I say that this is not new to us, right? If we look at the evolution of just this work to create space where everyone is included, everyone is experiencing equitable treatment, that work is not new, and the resistance to that work is not new. And so on one hand, you know, again, we've been here before, so let's just, you know, buckle our seatbelts and keep the work moving forward. But I do think and the motivation behind the resistance is not new, right? And so much of that is stemmed from people wanting to maintain power and control. So that is very real.
I think it started in heaven, and they were kicked out.
Yes, exactly. it just keep going, right?
And
absolutely.
They were kicked out. A third of them went with him, and he's been here ever since, right?
Yep. So that piece, that motivation, is still very real. And I don't think that's going to ever go away. So we recognize that, and we don't want to be naive about it. We don't want to be in denial about it. But I always say in my book, I talk about resistors matter, but they don't matter the most.
Absolutely.
Right? And so they matter in the sense that we need to be aware of them. We need to know who our enemies are. We need to know, and I think there's also an element where we need to try to understand the resistance, because while there is a community it's very clear why they are resisting, again, to try and maintain power and control. I think there are people who are resisting because they really don't understand. They have been misinformed. They have been miseducated. And I do think that there is space to have conversation with those people to encourage them to come along. Now, at some point, if they don't, then, you know, we just have to remind them that they will be left behind, and there are consequences to that. And then I think there's a space, when you think about this backlash, where to some extent we, meaning thought leaders, practitioners, we've brought some of this on ourselves. And what I mean by that is, and again, I say that qualified by recognizing those other two communities that are in this work and that's trying to create this resistance. But I think, you know, when we go back to the George Floyd murder. You know, after that happened, you know, on one hand, we had all of these organizations saying, you know, we're going to, you know, level up our commitment to this work.
Signing documents and making oaths to the community.
Allocating funds, all of that. But then you also had this uprise, and everybody was a DEI consultant.
I remember.
You remember that, right?
Yeah, right. And some of us have been doing the work for years.
Some of us have been doing the work for years. But all of a sudden, everybody now is a DEI consultant, because people saw opportunity. There was a lot of money, you know, out there, and people saw the opportunity, and you had a lot of charlatans who stepped in and would go into organizations. And I think that, again, I'm not saying that's the main reason in any way of why we're here, but I think that didn't help.
But then there was also a blurring of the lines too, because George Floyd brought about the vocality of Black Lives Matter and then Black Lives Matter. And I use the term pejoratively. It was hijacked to become now Trans Lives Matter and White Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter. And it almost began to dilute the impact. And if we would go back to my analogy, that was the eclipse. And then the solar flares would be all of the things that has happened in this process of time as this eclipsing is happening. And eclipses happen all day, every day. We just don't get to see them very often until some monumental event like a George Floyd murder. And we can go all the way back to Maurice Green. We can go all the way back, Rodney King. We can go back to any of those events that caused this surge. And those were all based on inappropriate police work. But it's in corporate America. It's in education arenas. It's in the healthcare institutes. We have a need. You have a resource, and we want to talk a little bit about that. I want to spend a lot of time getting into that, because this is your life's work, and it's a passion that I've known you for years, so I can see that this is who you are. What would you like to say just to kind of introduce the book to our listening audience? Somebody who's not a library junkie like I am. Tell us what's in this book.
Yeah, and I think to build off your point, because I think it ties into the intro to the book, but you're right. So much of what happened post George Floyd was this hijacking of the real issues. And fast forward a couple of years later, that's why we're in a situation where a lot of organizations are either backtracking,
reversing,
or we're not seeing any progress or evidence of real results from those claimed commitments a couple of years ago. In fact, there was a study that was done recently that said, and these are organizations who committed early on, but 80% said they're just going through the motions. They still don't really have a solid strategy around the work, and are really making a serious commitment to move the work forward. So that's still very much a reality. But my book is, even in the midst of all of that, I do believe, and I know that there are organizations, that there are individuals who are genuinely committed to the work across our city, across our country, and across the world. And that's who my audience is for this book. Okay. I believe that there are organizations that genuinely want to do the right thing. They genuinely are willing to do the work. But they don't know what or how to do it. And that's the whole purpose of the book.
Yeah, I was going to say, from what I've gathered in the book, and I'm going to hold it up so that those who are watching can see it. This is a book, not a booklet. It's a book. It can be used for academics.
Yes.
It can be used for book talks. It can be used as curriculum inside of organizations. It's entitled "Make It Last" by Dr. Sandra Upton. You've got a nice forward here.
Yes.
You've got the National Civil Rights Employment Law Attorney, Stephen Drew, to do the forward. Talk a little bit about how the dialogue or the conversation, you pick up a dialogue on DEI with this book, but how did the conversation get here to Make It Last?
Yeah. So, I was so honored that Stephen Drew said yes. We're blessed to have him right here in our own community.
Yes.
But he is nationally recognized and has made significant impact on this work. And we kind of joked about it when I asked him, because he said, I'm the one that goes in and sues the companies that don't do what's up with this? And I said, I just think the timing of it is, given that we're in the heat of all of this backlash, I said, I want you to come in and set the stage for hoping people understand this and try and process it from a legal perspective, because that's part of the fear. Like, we don't want to get in trouble. We don't want to get sued. We don't,
how far back can we go?
Right, exactly.
Before we get in trouble.
So level set for us, and not from a DEI expert, but from a legal expert. You're in this space every day. And so I really wanted him to start out by calming people down, and not to be in denial. He uses the term, we're in a war, and we are. But in that war, but we have to keep fighting, and we can keep fighting, and we do have ammunition legally to keep fighting. And so don't back down, be wise, get wise counsel, but we can keep moving the work forward. And so I was just delighted that he didn't hesitate to say yes, and laid the foundation. And then after, we got through sort of the legal jargon of it all, then again, my goal was to, based on my 25 plus years of experience and what I keep hearing and seeing as patterns and themes in this work, it's that organizations, again, are saying, we really do want to do the work. You keep telling us what to do, but we don't know how to do it. Yeah. We don't know how to operationalize it. So I can tell you all day long, it's clear that you need more people of color in leadership roles in your organization. You need to do a better job of retaining X generation, whatever the dynamic might be. And they're like, okay, but like how do we do that? And so that was a big motivation, and that's part of why the work doesn't last. The other reason is, again, because the practice of DEI is still relatively new, the research piece of it is still growing and evolving. It's being formed. And so for me, when I think about all of my education, my master's and my doctoral program, all was in the world of organizational behavior and development and change management. And that has a long-standing reputation and research base to it. And so when you think about DEI, it's all about change. We want behaviors, we want to change behaviors or create behaviors that support this idea of inclusion and equity equity, and we need to make sure our systems
And also,
are in alignment.
and also dial into workplace culture, because I think, I just finished, some work in organizational leadership development. Workplace culture, I think, is one of the most important places to start.
Absolutely.
When you do the litmus test of whether or not DEI is alive within an organization, be it educational institution, governmental agency, private sector, it doesn't matter.
Right.
That place has a culture.
Absolutely.
That place has a norm, a social norm, and biases are birthed, nurtured, developed, and grow inside of cultures.
Absolutely.
And those biases could be negative. They could be ignorant, and I use that term as well pejoratively, because sometimes people just don't know what they don't know.
That's right.
They just know it should be different. And if we keep doing the same thing, we're going to keep getting the same
Get the
thing.
same results.
Sure.
And culture is one of the most difficult things to change. You can't change it
absolutely.
overnight, especially when it's been ingrained.
Because people are involved.
People are involved, and the dominant culture, right, is typically who has set the terms for how we're going to engage.
Sure.
And they've all, in those terms and those values, I was in a session this morning facilitating and just talking about that evolution of, we have these values that typically honor and support the dominant culture and often neglect and create inequities for the marginalized cultures. And that has been entrenched into an organization for years, and it has infiltrated into the systems and policies. So that's a process. But as I think about the other part of why I wrote the book, so not only is it about, practically speaking, how do we get this work done, but it's undergirded by an evidence-based framework around change management, which we know it's proven, right? And
that's where you did some of your doctoral research.
Exactly right.
Let's talk a little bit about that, because what I would like to tend to is the audience member that's listening, or the person who's listening, that hear these words that they get thrown around a lot, and they may not know the meaning of these words, or they may not know the context of these words. So let's play that game. I'll put a couple of words on, you tell me what they mean.
Okay.
When you hear the term, whether it's in workplace or in a culture, when you hear the word minority, what does that mean?
Yeah, I really don't like to use that word.
I know.
I'd rather use underrepresented or historically marginalized, but it's typically that group or those groups in the organization that are less in numbers, and that have also historically been disadvantaged, disenfranchised, right, and overlooked.
Okay.
And part of that is manifested through systems that benefit the dominant, the larger culture.
Which leads me to another word.
Yes.
It's the ism word, when you hear the term racism, because now you can't say racism without someone being offended in a reversal way. So what does racism mean?
Yeah, power and privilege, right?
There you go.
And so there is no such thing as reverse racism.
Exactly.
But we can all be prejudiced against each other, and but racism specifically it's a marriage of power and privilege. So I can be privileged, but to really negatively impact you, it's the power that comes with that sets up those systems, that puts me at a disadvantage.
I was in an Institute for Healing Racism facilitating, and the cry of reverse racism came up, and I go, you really can't be hit by a car that's moving in reverse if you're the driver.
Right.
So
I love that analogy. That's excellent.
It came to me, and I'm thinking I might have to coin that phrase.
That's really good.
Well, let's talk about cultural competency.
Yes.
That's a 2-word phrase, but what does that mean? Because I think it opens up the door to understand that.
Key word there being competence, right, which suggests a skill. And I think it's hugely different from cultural awareness or cultural sensitivity. We use those terms a lot in organizations or in our conversations. And I say, we can start there, but we can't stop there, because just because I'm more culturally aware or culturally sensitive, neither of those guarantee that I'm going to be effective in my interactions with you. So the competence to me suggests a skill.
And the use of it.
The use of that skill and the ability to measure whether that skill is actually changing, growing, and having positive impact.
That's what I really like about your approach, is because you're not letting anybody off the hook, because you've got the science behind the passion that comes oftentimes from the experiences.
Yes.
And being a Black woman in America, you had some experiences, as does the Black man in America. And I think it's important. Just two more. I want to go with woke, because people are afraid of that word right now, and almost literally. I love the etymology of words. People have perverted
and demonized
the word woke. Somebody stood up in a session and says that they don't want their child to be woke. Their child is not an anti-racist. And so what does that mean?
And again, that's part of the campaign and the effort to, to dismantle this genuine work of simply trying to create equitable and inclusive opportunities for everyone, right? So it's an effort to miseducate, to confuse. If you go back to its original, use, it was all about, we do need to stay aware and knowledgeable of what's happening. And that's where I started with this conversation, the backlash. We don't let it deter us. No. We don't let it stop us, but we do need to be aware of what's happening. I was doing a keynote 2 weeks ago and just laying out the facts. And sometimes when you're actually talking about it, you're like, whoa, this is a mess. We've had over 10 states pass legislation. There are at least 19 who have attempted to as well. So if you combine those two, that's over half the country, right?
And that's reversing legislation. That's literally not even implementing new laws. That's reversing.
It's reversing. And those 10, there have literally been some new policy or legislation that has caused a setback in the DEI work, mostly higher education, but they're trying to penetrate, corporate and other spaces as well. And then 19 pieces of legislation have been introduced in 19 other places now. Those are at various stages. Some have been vetoed. Some are still in the works.
Some are just ratifications of what was outlawed in the past.
Exactly.
It's like you're just bringing back something that wasn't supposed to exist in the first place.
So that's very real. So we need to be aware of that. And I was just reading an article this morning, the NAACP has joined up with others to have a formal, fight back against some of this legislation. But we can't fight back if we're ignorant about what's happening. I was going to say
there probably needs to be some form of a summit of sorts to give people enough education,
and to understand what we need to do.
I'm going to be very honest. The majority of this listening audience probably has experienced some things, but didn't know what to call it. Didn't know how to categorize it. Last one, because these are really good.
Yes.
Critical race theory. You knew that was coming, right?
Yes, I did. And again, it's just been the effort by some to create confusion and miseducation around the attempt, around the language, to suggest that it is this anti-white, it is this, trying to give people unfair opportunity and advantage, and they just need to work, it's about merit, when we know that it is simply, when you take the time to do the homework and look at it, it was simply, research-based acknowledgement that we have had these systems created, right, that have come about with the intent to advantage certain groups and disadvantage other groups.
Sure.
And so critical race theory just says that if we're going to turn the tide and create equitable opportunities, specifically from a race perspective, we cannot do it without attacking these old systems that have been in place and that are still having similar impact today as they did 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah, we can go all the way back to 30 years ago.
Right.
I'm of the persuasion that race is a social construct, but it has been perverted to the point where even in the faith-based communities, I was talking to Scott Welch a couple weeks ago and his work in this field, but even in the faith-based community, we still see these divides and these walls, these barriers. We see, plantations, we see the big house, we see all of the elements that not remotely, but very blatantly resemble things of a pre-slavery era. That's all I can think of to say it. And it happens in so many ways to where it's subliminal and then it's so bold at the same time. I did talk to, like I said, ironically, there are a lot of people in the field writing some books. Tell me a little bit about what makes your resource a little bit different than some of the other material that's out there.
Yeah, I think, again, it's a combination of a couple of things. I think the first piece, again, is my experience is that a lot of organizations who genuinely want to do this work, they understand the what, but they don't know the how. And so I did my best to help. I tell them, everywhere I tell you what to do, I tell you how to do it.
I love
and
it.
I tell people, when you're done reading this book, you can no longer say you don't know what to do or how to do it. So you cannot unknow. Well, you'll probably have to do a lot of.
Unsee what you
can't
saw.
unsee. Now you might have to do a whole lot of unlearning, but you cannot unknow this.
Right.
And so that's in the practical application of it. I think the second piece again is marrying DEI with solid evidence-based research. We know that we understand the research around change management. We know that 70% of change efforts fail.
Yeah.
It's because people don't want to go through the process and do the work. And so it made complete sense to me to marry those two. And I think most people can understand that change management mindset, not just across the country, but across the globe. So that's the second piece, right? So first piece, very practical. I lay the foundation. I am, an academician
I was going to say your professorial perspective comes through quite clearly.
But I try to marry it with that practical application.
Well, I was going to say you're empathetic though to the beginning reader, to the intermediary reader, to the person who's no longer a novice in this field. So HR professionals could benefit from this. Mid-level managers, employees or associates within an organization. Speaking of academics, the book is very, very well put together.
Thank you.
Broke it into phases.
Yes.
Phase 1 is unfreezing the current state, in which you show steps. These are how-to steps of deciding that this can't wait, building your tribe, mapping the route, and then, of course, sharing the DEI plan. Phase 2, introducing new DEI practices, where you can equip superheroes, you can plan the victories, and then also use the snowball effect. What I like is the last part, phase 3, making it last. And you give some bonus steps. We've got about maybe 4 or 5 minutes left.
Okay.
I want you to just nail it. Actually, we got 3 minutes left.
3 minutes left. Okay.
Yeah, I want you to nail it. This is good because
Yes.
I think we got some folks intrigued, not only just to purchase the book, where books are sold, all online, but you're also in this community, moving around.
Yes.
So, give us those closing words.
Yeah, and it's for all of those people that you just described, but it's also for the everyday ally. It's that person who really does want to be a part of the solution. I tell organizations that DEI is a shared responsibility.
Absolutely.
So it's not just the CDO and the CEO and the department head, but it's everybody across the organization, vertically and horizontally. So anybody that is trying to understand the work better and really wants to contribute or even challenge their organization to do better, they can read the book and find something in it for them, especially the superheroes chapter.
I like it.
That last step you talk about, make it last. Again, we know that the reason the work doesn't last is because we're not willing to do the work and go through those change management steps. And so I think it is very enlightening. I share my story throughout, so I'm not, I'm coming at this from a wide range of perspectives, including my lived experiences as a Black woman in this work, and I am not exempt from being a recipient, of microaggressions. And so they're real stories that I think most people, but particularly those who are from marginalized communities, can relate to. And can see themselves in it. So I don't shy away from that, but it is very solution oriented. I think that's part of how we fight back, is that rather than sit back and get frustrated and argue, but let's get together, let's get a plan that is data driven, that is outcome driven, that everybody is sharing in the work. So that we know that when the work that we're doing is going to make a difference and it will last, and that will outlive any of these efforts to undermine and stop the work.
Man, this is phenomenal. How can people get a hold of you?
Yes, so you can reach me. You can go to my website, which is www.uptonconsultinggroup.com, or you can reach me directly at my email address, sandra.upton@uptonconsultinggroup. I know it's long.com. I'm on LinkedIn every day. That's my baby.
That's your social media,
That's my social media. I am on Facebook a little bit, but LinkedIn, and so you'll see me there, just really sharing nuggets and tips and stories around ways in which we can all continue to help move this work forward. forward.
Sure. You've traveled this country and the world.
Yes.
Doing this work is your passion. It is something that I believe is going to continue to open doors. And God has a way to use the voices of generations for generations.
Yes.
I mean, so this will go into the annals of history, of people being able to say, wow, there is a responsibility to make it last for each of us. Yeah. So thank you for the contribution to the study of this subject matter of DEI and the work, but also thank you for your passion. I believe you're going to make a difference.
I'm trying.
I believe it's going to make a difference. Well, thanks for being here today. For those who have hung out with us, we have been talking to Dr. Sandra Upton. Make It Last is the book. You can go and get it where books are sold online, but check out her website and follow her on LinkedIn. I'm just excited to have such caliber of people here in the studio on Community Voices. This is Terrence Lachey, and you're tuned into 91.9 FM, The People's Choice.
You've been listening to Community Voices with your host, Terrence Lachey. Community Voices can be heard every Friday at 12 noon. This radio roundtable features community, business, and religious leaders that discuss current events and topics that impact our urban community. If you would like to be a guest, or if you have a suggested topic, contact the station today at 616-259-7342. Until next week, let your voice be heard in the community.